Being primary school students, we could relate our stories, feelings, and dreams a lot easier to others, but never to our cousins. I still remember how I climbed on top of my mother's Singer sewing machine and bumped my head on the bobbin spindle, which pierced through my left eyebrow, passing the eyeball. I remember how the blood gashed out from the hole I had made, and how she panicked, thinking that I had probably damaged my brain or blinded my left eye. I remember it being stitched at the hospital and wore an eye patch for a while, but could not wait until they took it off. This happened long before I started my schooling, and I still carry the mark. It is a tiny scar hidden under my eyebrow, although it has not been a significant feature in identification. My brother and I did extremely well at school with our mother's much appreciated help, while our father was totally divorced from all his responsibilities, only caring for his own special interests, which we were not expected to know anything about. As far as he was concerned, amongst his only known interests, his horse racing and gambling habits were the most meaningful. Personally, if I had a chance before my entry into the world, I would have chosen someone more caring, more responsible for a father. Is there perhaps anything like that, choosing one's parents before being born? If that was the case, what could have been the reason for such an undertaking on my part? Was it to learn or teach someone wisdom, or else I must have been drunk when making that decision? However, as the years rolled by, I realized that his presence was nothing more than providing one of his sperm for his wife's pregnancy to enable the fetus to develop and become me in this world. I can say the same thing for my brother. This way, our so-called father figure has fulfilled a necessary human task. In fact, his later behavior declared just that. Our mother, on the other hand, preferred to think of her marriage as her unfortunate destiny, insisting on staying with him, who never had time for his family and was full of resentment. She did not want us to grow up without him, believing that every child needed their father, sacrificing herself, her own freedom, and happiness. She may have felt it her duty to protect her family's traditional values. Strangely, she hoped that he too would learn, mature, and become a good father. I feel that she was living in a fool's paradise, knowing deep down that he would never change. But what made him the way he was? Was it due to what he had experienced in his military days on assignment somewhere in the middle of an awful war? Was it due to being a prisoner of war, where he had seen and experienced terrible things? We were never to know. It was a secret kept hidden from us. I am certain that our mother knew a lot of things, but did not want us to discover about those issues. Just get on with our lives. At times, our father behaved almost like a haunted person, hiding his true self. I heard stories about him fighting alongside the French legionaries, and was subjected to some humanly unacceptable situations, thus developing the characteristics which we became familiar with. There were many things said, but how much was true or real? We heard that he had held commanding position, but then spent time in Istanbul in his unfortunate ways, until his relatives intervened. If he had served in the Turkish army, however, he would certainly not have been put in a position of command, being of an Armenian background. I remember him presenting me with a handwritten note in French, in which he was begging the authorities to consider his situation on humanitarian grounds, for he would love to return. What indeed was he begging for? And where, in reality, did he want to return to? I had no idea. He asked me to take it to certain authorities, or better still, he would send it in himself. When I spoke about it to my mother, although he insisted that I should not speak of it, her response was, "Just ignore it, and there can be nothing of concern." Ever since then, nothing further was said, and I simply kept it a secret, which I preferred not to know anything about. Another interesting issue was that my mother loved to speak French to me, adored French language, and was keenly interested in French fashion magazines. I clearly remember her words when she often repeated, "Je t'aime, enfant, mon frère." When I was very young, she taught me how to improve my speech and speak properly, and sometimes she did so in Armenian, Turkish, and Arabic. But whilst staying in Turkey, things were different. She, like her sister and other relatives, preferred to live just the same as the locals, never wanting her true background to be discovered. Armenians, and especially those from the European continent, constantly lived in fear in case they were found out as belonging to a minority group. It was considered a crime, and, when looking at it from an Islamic way of thinking, it was a great sin. When I was 8 years old, my brother and I invented our own languages. This way, we could correspond and understand each other, even having a little gossip, without anybody becoming aware of what we were talking about. That was so unique and so special to us. Some of the words we used were the backward spelling of a number of languages we were subjected to at home. They were a mixture of French, Armenian, English, and even Turkish. I was so incredibly keen to speak a different language, even at that age, which led me to learn several more in my adult years. I still remember so clearly when we were invited to a party where we were only to watch people having fun from the rooftop of my aunt's address. I was standing on the balcony, and for a joke recited a poem I had invented in a language which I made up for fun, whereupon a young Turkish girl in the neighbor's courtyard started to swear, shouting, "The enemy has landed here. Bring my shotgun. I want to kill that bastard." Upon which my aunt hastily came out onto the balcony, asking what the problem was, and was told she should bring the dog to the balcony so that the girl could shoot the bastard. Although she was told that the young boy was only joking, and did not really speak the enemy's tongue, she obviously hated the foreign dogs, and could not be calmed. I rushed indoors, my hair standing on end. I was only joking, and sadly learned how not to behave in that most restrictive country. Oh, how much I wanted to run away from it all. However, it never deterred me from learning a different language. For some reason, I was particularly interested to learn English, and possibly German by listening to the radio, or trying to understand the written languages from library books with the aid of dictionaries. Speaking of German, some beautiful German girls in my mother's fashion magazines were interesting me a lot. I felt just the same way about the images of gorgeous English girls, and thought they could be the real angels on earth, and therefore the language they spoke had to be the language of the angels. I believed it to be that way until I discovered what that lovely language really was and where it originated from. I remember my mother's Burda fashion magazines, printed in German and English. When looking at those girls' images, to me, they appeared a little too reddish with their skin color without realizing the possibility of print-related technologies, thus making me think that perhaps Germans belonged to a red-skinned race. Later I was to learn who, in reality, the red-skinned people were, but I was yet to learn what Germans looked like. To my young mind, the English looked best of them all. I was fascinated with some of their pure white looks. This may be why I wanted to learn those languages. However, I was yet to discover other colorful races, and the prospect of doing so was exciting. Furthermore, all the comic books I was reading and collecting were in English, and all the exciting films at the cinema were also in that language. When I watched those westerns in the movies, I felt very sad for the Indians, as they were always killed in them. They alone made me compare them with the race I represented when in Turkey. In fact, I felt terribly embarrassed for being an Armenian in that country. For reasons I could not fully understand, the American natives in those films became closer to my heart, and I wished I could help them live a good life. As I grew older, I felt a little more closeness towards them, but could not say why. Did I have a past life experience as one of those natives, perhaps? I was yet to learn the truth in regard to Native Americans. As you may have guessed, I could no longer tolerate those movies, the same as war films. And instead I began to show more interest in science fiction. Interestingly, my interest in English became so intense that I needed to learn to speak and express myself in that language quickly. I was becoming very frustrated when looking at those wonderful magazines and films, yet unable to follow them completely. I wanted to talk to those angels, speaking the angels' language. I was to learn many things about angels, but certainly not how religious people described them. Our mother and grandmothers often talked about them. Discovering my intense interest in learning English, my mother employed an American war veteran living nearby who was willing to teach me. He was elderly and regularly visited us just to talk. He enjoyed the Turkish-Armenian Greek coffee and sweets, which the girls working for my mother made. He started to teach me English during the school holidays and on some weekends, concentrating on the grammar and American speech patterns. It was interesting, but too hard to twist my tongue to sound right. In reality, I was learning American, and it was not the angel's tongue. The language was beautiful, but there was something drastically missing. That gentleman was extremely kind, and ever ready to spend more time in teaching. And I am certainly very thankful to him. He had a characteristic which baffled us. He did not know what honey was, only learning about it when he tasted it for the first time at our house. One day he was not able to come, probably due to ill health or other personal reasons. He may have decided to go back to the States. Or was it my mother's decision not to continue? I really had no idea. I later started to learn English from an English tutor. Now I could pronounce the words more easily, creating long and complicated sentences. I was happy, for I started to speak the language of the angels and began to understand, even translate the books I borrowed from the English library. I could now relate to all those American books and magazines about astronomy as well. It was like coming back home, even when I was not home. This also encouraged my brother to be interested in learning English. During my higher education days, I was very successful in the English language course and was able to teach other friends simple phrases at school. However, I was a little naughty, helping them to pass their English exams. Even during our primary school days, we often frequented other American or English cultural lending libraries, even though my comprehension of the language was limited without the use of dictionaries. I borrowed many books, particularly on subjects of astronomy, space exploration, and flight. At high school, I borrowed literature on history in regard to the beginnings of human civilizations. This not only helped me and my brother to improve our learning more about the language of the angels, but also taught us all about the exciting prospects of flight and the beauty of other galactic and planetary systems. By doing so, it felt as if we were still connected to our beginnings outside the Earthian realm. I always believed that every one of us came from the stars. For my brother and me, it was like touching home and remembering our past. We were two unusual young boys whose interests were different. For others around us, we had boyish interests and were regarded as dreamers. During my high school days, I organized a space club and rocket club and started to publish small pamphlets about space exploration and also about what others around the world were trying to achieve. The subjects I covered were usually on journeying to the moon and other planets within our solar system. I used to borrow 16mm films documenting the subjects I was keenly interested in, showing them to the rest of the school, thus exciting the other students and younger teachers.